You're listening to Midnight Whispers Stories. Tonight's stories focus on sleepless nights across America. Moments when the body is exhausted, but the mind refuses to shut down. This channel delivers true psychological horror built around isolation, silence, and the slow distortion of normal reality. If you value long-form immersion with a consistent atmosphere, subscribe to Midnight Whispers Stories. Story 1. Watching Distance. I need to tell you what happened to me. And I need you to listen carefully, because there is something you need to know about the small spaces between sleeping and waking. There's something that lives there, something that's been waiting for you. Still awake at 4:17 a.m. The house was quiet, but sleep never came back. That's where my nightmare began, though I didn't know it yet. I was lying in my bed in my ranch house outside Springdale, Oklahoma, staring up at a ceiling I couldn't quite see in the darkness. The red numbers on my alarm clock glowed in that haunting, eerie way that makes everything feel wrong. 4:17 in the morning is a specific kind of terrifying. Too late to stay up, too early to wake up. It is the dead space where normal people dawn to exist anymore. My wife was asleep beside me, or so I thought. I turned my head to check, and that is when the chilling realization hit me. Her breathing was off. Not asleep breathing. That steady, rhythmic sound you get used to hearing every single night for 23 years. This was shallow, fragmented, like she was holding her breath and releasing it in irregular bursts. Unsettling doesn't even cover how that made me feel. My heart started moving at that pace where, something is genuinely wrong, even if your brain hasn't caught up yet. I wanted to ask if she was okay, but something stopped me. Some instinct that screamed not to move, not to make a sound. I laid there motionless, listening to that disturbing breathing pattern, wondering if I was imagining something that wasn't really there. Then I heard it, a noise from downstairs. Not a creak, not the house settling in its normal way. This was intentional. Something had shifted. Something had moved. My blood went cold. That genuine, literal feeling of ice water rushing through your veins. I've heard people describe it before, but experiencing it yourself is different. It's paralyzing. I stayed still. My eyes were open now, staring into the darkness that filled my bedroom. The shadowy forms of furniture became sinister shapes. The closet door, which I always left cracked open, looked like it was gaping wider than before. Fear crept up my spine like something alive, touching me with cold fingers. Minutes passed, maybe seconds. Time works differently in that creepy silence. My breathing matched hers now, shallow, terrified. I could hear every tiny sound. The refrigerator humming downstairs, a car passing on the highway, blocks away. The windmill at the edge of our property, turning slowly in the night breeze. But underneath all of that, there was something else, something that didn't belong. Footsteps, not loud, not obvious, but there on the hardwood floor in the living room. A slow, measured pace. I walked through that room 1,000 times. I know every inch of it, and something was walking through it now. In the darkness, in my house, while I lay frozen in my bed. My hand moved slowly toward my wife. I needed to wake her, to warn her, but the moment my fingers touched her shoulder, she turned to me. The movement was sudden and mechanical, like a puppet on strings. In the darkness, I couldn't see her face clearly, but I could feel her looking at me. Her breathing had stopped. Complete silence. There, someone in the house, she whispered. And her voice was wrong. Flattened, like someone doing a bad impression of her voice. I wanted to scream. Every nerve in my body was screaming at me to get up, to run, to do something. But I couldn't. Terror had me pinned to that mattress like a weight on my chest. I tried to speak, but nothing came out except a sound like a wounded animal. The footsteps downstairs had stopped. That was somehow worse than hearing them, than not knowing where it was. The thing that wasn't supposed to be there. Because now I understood something horrible and chilling that turned my understanding of reality inside out. Whatever was in my house wasn't making noise on accident. It was letting me hear it. It wanted me to know. My wife turned away from me. She got out of bed, slowly and deliberately, moving toward the bedroom door. I tried to grab her, but my arm wouldn't respond to what my brain was telling it to do. Paralysis had wrapped itself around me completely. She reached the door, opened it, and the hallway beyond was darker than any darkness I'd ever seen. Not just the absence of light, it was the presence of something else. A negative space, a void, Staring into it made my eyes hurt. She stepped through it. I don't. Do you know how long I lay there? Minutes. Hours. The terrifying silence stretched on forever. My house, a place that had always been my sanctuary, my safe space where my family was protected from the world, had become something else entirely. It had become a nightmare, and I was trapped inside it, conscious and aware and completely helpless. Eventually, I found the will to move. Adrenaline had given me small amounts of control back. I pushed myself out of bed, my legs barely supporting my weight, and crept toward the bedroom door. Every step was agony. The darkness seemed to press against me, resisting my movement. The air felt thick, wrong, saturated with something I couldn't name. I moved down the hallway. The stairs were ahead, just visible as a void within the greater darkness. I couldn't see anything beyond them. My hand found the wall, and I used it to guide myself, my palm sliding along the familiar surface that now felt alien and creepy. That's when I heard it again. Not footsteps this time, breathing, slow, deliberate, and wrong. It wasn't human breathing. It was like something massive was taking in air through multiple openings, like the sound of wind moving through a vast, hollow space. I froze. Every muscle in my body locked up tight. The breathing was coming from the living room, from multiple directions at once. And underneath it, I heard something else. A wet, sliding sound, like something being dragged across the hardwood floor. Something heavy. My eyes had adjusted slightly to the darkness, and through the stair railings, I could see a shape in the living room. It was impossibly large. It filled a space in a way that hurt to look at, like my brain was refusing to fully process what I was seeing. There were edges to it, but they didn't connect properly. It was more shadow than substance, but a shadow with weight and intention and a terrible kind of consciousness. And it was watching me. I know this sounds insane. I know that's what you rethinking, but I felt that attention the way you feel heat from a fire. It was a palpable, undeniable thing. The entity in my living room had become aware that I was aware of it, and that awareness created a new kind of terror. The kind of fear that comes from being truly, completely alone in the presence of something that shouldn't exist. I should have screamed. I should have run. I should have done something to save myself. Instead, I backed away slowly, my eyes never leaving that impossible shadow, until I retreated up the stairs. I didn't shut my bedroom door. Something told me that locking it wouldn't make any difference, and that act of closing it might provoke something worse. I spent the rest of the night pressed against the far corner of my bedroom, watching the doorway, listening to that disturbing breathing, listening to the sounds of something moving through my house, opening and closing drawers, moving things in the kitchen, ascending the stairs with that slow, measured pace. But it never entered my bedroom. It stayed on the other side of the threshold, and I stayed on this side, and we waited for dawn together. The horrifying part wasn't that it wanted to hurt me. The terrifying truth that I came to understand as the night crawled on was that it was studying me, learning about me, getting familiar with my space in my life and the small, intimate details of who I was. When sunlight finally leaked through the windows, the presence withdrew, not suddenly, but gradually, like a tide going out. The oppressive weight that had filled my house began to dissipate. The breathing stopped. The sounds of movement ceased. By the time I could see clearly, it was gone. I found my wife downstairs in the kitchen, making coffee. She was completely normal, cheerful, even. She had no memory of getting out of bed, no memory of anything. When I tried to describe what had happened, she looked at me with genuine concern. She thought I had a nightmare, but I hadn't. The real nightmare was this. That night was 6 months ago, and I'm not sleeping anymore. The thing that came to my house that night, the presence, the shadow, the unsettling darkness, it didn't leave. It is still here. It watches during the day, hidden in the spaces between moments. I can feel its attention on me constantly. When I am alone in a room, I know it is in the corner, just beyond the edge of my vision. When I am driving on the highway, I can see it in my peripheral, keeping pace with my car from the wheat fields beside the road. My family has noticed that something is wrong with me. I am paranoid. I don't sleep. I compulsively check locks that don't exist in our house. But I can tell them the truth because the truth sounds insane. The chilling reality is this. The thing that invaded my home that night didn't come from anywhere. It didn't break in through a window or come down a chimney. It had always been there, in the shadows of my childhood bedroom, under the bed, in every place I've ever slept, watching from the darkness that exists just beyond the range of human sight. I've been sharing my life with it since I was a child, and I never noticed. That night, something changed. The veil between the world of the living and the world where these things wait and watch became thin. That night, it finally let itself be seen, and now I understand something horrifying and final. It didn't come to my house on that terrible night. It came to show me that it had been there all along. That it was everywhere. That behind every shadow, in every moment of darkness, in that terrifying space between sleep and waking, there is something waiting for all of us. I don't know what it wants. I don't know what happens when it finally decides that watching isn't enough anymore. But I know one thing with absolute certainty. I am not special. This isn't happening only to me. If you re-listening to this, if you reawake in the dark right now, feeling that unsettling prickle on the back of your neck, you know what I'm talking about. The presence is there. It's always been there. And now that you know about it, now that I've put this thought in your mind, you will start to notice it too. In the spaces between your thoughts, in the darkness at the edge of your vision, in that creepy moment when you wake up at 4:17 a.m. and your house seems too quiet and you can't quite remember why you woke up. It's been watching all along, waiting for you to realize it was there. It's still watching right now. Story 2. Night that wouldn't end. I checked my phone for the 14th time in an hour, 3:47 in the morning. The same time it had been for the last 6 hours. The same horrifying, impossible time that refused to change no matter how many miles I drove down that endless Nevada highway. Let me tell you something about fear. Real fear. Not the jump scare from a horror movie or the creepy feeling you get walking past a cemetery. I mean the kind of terror that crawls into your bones and makes you question everything you thought was real. That is what I felt that night. The night that wouldn't end. It started simple enough. I was driving from Reno to Las Vegas, a route I had taken dozens of times for work. Sales representative life, motels, gas stations, truck stops, and long stretches of desert highway under stars so bright they looked fake. I left Reno around midnight, hoping to beat the morning traffic into Vegas. The road was empty, just me, the hum of my tires, and the darkness pressing against my windshield like something alive. Around what should have been 2 in the morning, I noticed the first strange thing. A sign for a rest stop I had never seen before. Weathered wood, hand-painted letters that read, Last Chance Point. The name felt unsettling in a way I could not explain, but I needed coffee. My eyes were getting heavy, and the highway seemed to stretch forever into nothing. The rest stop was old. Really old. The kind of place that looked like it had been forgotten by time itself. A single building with peeling paint, a few parking spaces, and one flickering light above the door. No other cars, no sounds except the wind moving through the desert brush. I sat in my car for a moment, engine running, staring at that door. Something felt wrong. The air felt wrong. Too still, too quiet, like the world was holding its breath. But I was tired, exhausted. So I went inside. The interior smelled like dust and something else. Something I could not name. Decay, maybe, or age beyond measuring. There was a counter, empty. Vending machines that looked like they were from the 70s. And in the corner, a payphone. An actual payphone with a rotary dial. Who even had those anymore? I bought a bitter coffee from a machine that groaned like it was in pain. Then I noticed the clock on the wall. 3:47. I checked my phone. 3:47. Okay, time to get back on the road. Except when I walked outside, everything felt different. The air was colder, heavier. The darkness seemed thicker somehow, pressing closer to the light above the door. And my car looked strange, like I was seeing it through water, distorted. Wrong. I got in and drove. 5 miles, 10, 20. I kept checking my phone. 3:47. Still 3:47. My heart started pounding. This was impossible. Phones did not just freeze, but when I checked the clock in my dashboard, it said the same thing. 3:47. The highway should have had landmarks, signs, other cars eventually, but there was nothing, just endless asphalt disappearing into darkness. The white lines on the road seemed to pulse in my headlights. Hypnotic, disturbing. I tried the radio, static, every station, just hissing static that sounded almost like whispering. Then I saw the sign again. Last Chance Point, 2 miles. My blood went cold. I had been driving away from that rest stop for at least 30 minutes. How could I be approaching it again? I pressed harder on the gas. 60, 70, 80 miles per hour. The sign passed. The rest stop appeared again on my right. Same flickering light. Same empty parking lot. Same feeling of wrongness that made my skin crawl. I kept driving. Faster now. My hands were shaking on the wheel. Every few miles, the sign appeared. Every time, the rest stop materialized from the darkness like some kind of nightmare loop. And my phone never changed. 347. Always 347. The fourth time I passed it, I saw something that made me slam on the brakes. There was a car in the parking lot now. My car. The exact same make and model. Same license plate. I could see someone sitting in the driver's seat, illuminated by that sickly light. The figure was staring straight ahead, not moving. I sat there on the highway, engine idling, staring at my own car with someone else inside it. Or maybe it was me. Maybe I was looking at myself. The thought was so terrifying, so completely horrifying, that I felt my mind starting to crack around the edges. I drove again, away, faster. The speedometer hit 90. The desert blurred past. But distance meant nothing here. Space meant nothing. Time meant nothing. I was trapped in some kind of loop, some pocket of existence that refused to let me go. That is when I started seeing the other cars. Not on the road, but parked at the rest stop each time I passed. More and more of them. Sedans, trucks, SUVs, all empty, all covered in dust like they had been there for years, decades. How many people had been caught in this? How many had stopped at last chance point and never made it out? My gas gauge was dropping. Quarter tank, then eighth. The nightmare was not just the time loop. It was the realization that eventually I would run out of fuel. I would be forced to stop. And then what? Would I become one of those dusty cars? Would I sit in my driver's seat, frozen at 3:47 in the morning, while my body slowly withered away? The fear was unbearable now, a living thing inside my chest. I could barely breathe. My vision was starting to blur. I had been driving for hours in the same night, trapped in the same moment, and my mind was fracturing under the weight of impossibility. Then I remembered something, a story I had heard once at a truck stop. An old-timer talking about haunted stretches of highway, places where time did not work right. He said if you ever got caught in one, you had to do something that felt completely wrong. You had to stop running. You had to face it. The rest stop appeared again ahead. I could see all those abandoned vehicles. 20, maybe 30. A graveyard of people who had tried to escape. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely hold the wheel. Every instinct screamed at me to keep driving. But I knew, somehow I knew that was exactly what kept people trapped. I pulled into the parking lot, cut the engine. The silence was deafening, absolute, like the world had died. I sat there for a moment, trying to control my breathing, trying to hold on to my sanity. Then I got out. The cold hit me immediately. Not natural cold. This was something else. Something that came from a place where life was not supposed to exist. I walked toward the building. Each step felt like moving through thick water. The air resisted me, pushed back. The darkness around the edges of that single light seemed to writhe and pulse. The door opened before I touched it. Inside, the place looked different. Older, darker. The vending machines were rusted hulks. The floor was covered in dust inches thick. And standing behind the counter was a figure. Tall, impossibly thin. Its face was shadow. Not shadowed, shadow. Like darkness had taken human shape. It spoke without moving, without sound. The words appeared directly in my mind. Chilling, disturbing, wrong in every way. You stop. I could not speak, could not move. Terror had frozen every muscle. They never stop. They run until the fuel dies. Until they die. But you stop. You faced it. The thing that was not human tilted its head, studying me. I felt its attention like ice water in my veins. Time is not what you think it is. This place exists between moments, between seconds. We collect those who wander in, those who are too tired, too alone, too lost. We keep them in the space where nothing changes. The eternal now. 347 forever. I found my voice, barely a whisper. Why? Because fear is infinite here, and we feed on infinite things. My legs almost gave out. I wanted to run. Every cell in my body screamed for it, but I forced myself to stand still. To look at this thing made of darkness, to accept that I might die here in this terrible place. But you stopped, it said again. You broke the pattern. That is rare, so I will give you a choice. Leave now, drive away. You will find the loop is broken. Or stay, join us, become part of the collection, part of the fear. I did not wait. I ran, back to my car. My hands fumbled with the keys. The engine roared to life. I threw it in reverse, then forward, tires screaming as I peeled out of that parking lot. The rest stop disappeared behind me into darkness so complete it was like it had never existed. I drove. The highway stretched ahead. And then, finally, blessedly, I saw something different. A sign, Las Vegas, 87 miles. I looked at my phone. 4:15 in the morning. Time had moved forward. I was free. But here's the thing that keeps me awake at night. The thing that makes my hands shake when I think about it. Time moved forward, but the feeling of night stayed fixed. Even now, months later, I cannot shake the sensation that I never really left. That some part of me is still sitting in that parking lot. Still trapped at 3:47. Still staring at that door. Because sometimes, late at night, I check my phone. And just for a second, just for one horrifying moment, it reads 3:47. The same unsettling time, the same terrible moment. And I wonder if I really escaped, or if this is just another loop, a bigger one I have not recognized yet. I wonder if you would know if you were trapped. If time was moving but you were standing still. If the night refused to end and you just kept living the same darkness over and over without realizing it. That is the real nightmare. Not the thing in the rest stop. Not the loop itself, but the creepy possibility that you are in one right now. That you have always been in one. That the night never ended for any of us. We just stopped noticing. Sleepless nights change how reality feels. If this kind of psychological horror works for you, subscribe to Midnight Whispers Stories. Subscribing gives you consistent long-form stories, the same atmosphere, and new releases you can always return to. Story 3. Listening Room. I stopped hearing silence 3 weeks ago, and now I understand why that should terrify you. It started in the most ordinary way possible. I moved into a rental house outside Flagstaff, Arizona, one of those forgotten properties tucked between the highway and the desert where nobody asks questions and the landlord never visits. The rent was cheap. The isolation was exactly what I needed after the divorce. Just me, the wind, and the endless stretch of sand and scrub brush that made the rest of the world feel like a memory. The first night, I heard the footsteps. Not loud, not dramatic, just the soft, deliberate sound of someone walking across hardwood floors in the room directly above my bedroom. The problem was simple and horrifying. There was no second floor. The house was a single-story ranch with an attic access panel. I had checked myself. Nothing up there but insulation and darkness. I told myself it was the woods settling. Old houses make noise. This is what I repeated while lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to those careful, measured steps crossing from one end of the house to the other. Back and forth. Always the same path. Always at exactly 2 in the morning. By the third night, I started recognizing the pattern. 12 steps forward. A pause. 12 steps back. The sound was too precise, too rhythmic to be anything natural. Every creak landed in the same spot. Every footfall carried the same weight. It was like listening to a recording on loop, except I could feel the vibrations through the walls. That is when I realized something deeply unsettling. Every sound felt intentional. The house had started speaking to me in a language I did not want to understand. The hum of the refrigerator would stop at odd moments, creating pockets of silence that felt carved out deliberately. The bathroom faucet would drip exactly 7 times, then pause for 30 seconds, then repeat. The air conditioning unit clicked on and off in sequences that felt like Morse code, though I could never quite decipher what message it was trying to send. I am not a paranoid person. I worked as an insurance adjuster for 15 years. I dealt in facts, numbers, provable claims. But standing in that kitchen at 3 in the morning, listening to the rhythmic dripping and the footsteps overhead that should not exist, I felt something shift in my understanding of reality. These were not random noises. They were intentional. They were designed. The fourth night, I decided to investigate. I dragged a ladder from the garage and pushed open the attic access panel with my phone flashlight cutting through the darkness above. The smell hit me first. Not decay or mold, but something else. Something clean and chemical, like hospital disinfectant mixed with copper. The attic was empty. Completely, impossibly empty. No insulation. No boxes. No dust. Just bare wooden beams and a floor so clean it looked freshly installed. In the center of the space, I found 12 evenly spaced indentations in the wood. Pressure marks, as if something heavy had stood there repeatedly, wearing grooves into the boards. I measured the distance between the marks. They matched the spacing of the footsteps I had been hearing. 12 forward, 12 back, the same path, over and over, pressed into the wood like a ritual. That night, the sounds changed. The footsteps stopped at 2 in the morning, just as they always did. But then came something new. A scraping sound, low and grinding, like furniture being dragged across concrete. It came from the basement. The basement I had been specifically told did not exist when I signed the lease. I found the entrance behind a false panel in the hall closet. The previous tenant must have known it was there. They must have hidden it deliberately. The stairs descended into darkness so complete my flashlight seemed to die in the black, swallowed by something that refused to reflect light. Every step down felt like a mistake. The air grew colder, thicker, pressing against my skin like wet fabric. The scraping sound continued, rhythmic and purposeful, echoing off unseen walls. When I reached the bottom, my light finally caught something. A chair, a simple wooden chair sitting in the center of an otherwise empty concrete room. Facing the stairs, facing me, and on the seat, worn into the wood grain from years of use, was a perfect impression of someone sitting. Someone who had waited in that exact spot for a very long time. Behind the chair, I saw them. 12 speakers mounted to the walls in a perfect circle. Their black mesh faces pointed inward at the chair like a jury. Professional equipment. Expensive. The kind used in recording studios or research facilities. Wires ran from each speaker into a single black box mounted on the far wall, its LED lights blinking in sequences I was beginning to recognize from the house above. The scraping sound had stopped. The silence that replaced it was worse. It felt expectant, hungry. I ran. I scrambled back up those stairs faster than I thought possible, my hand slipping on the railing, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly across the walls. When I slammed the basement door shut and shoved the false panel back into place, I heard it. All 12 speakers activating at once. A sound so loud it shook the floorboards beneath my feet. It was my voice, my exact voice, speaking words I had never said. I stopped hearing silence 3 weeks ago. The playback continued, every conversation I had with myself. Every phone call, every moment I thought I was alone. All recorded, all analyzed, all played back to me in my own voice with slight distortions that made my skin crawl. The pitch was wrong. The emphasis landed in uncanny places. It was me, but processed through something that did not understand how humans actually speak. I grabbed my keys and ran for the door. It was locked, all of them. Every door, every window, every possible exit sealed from the outside. I had not locked them. Someone else had. Something else had. The footsteps started again overhead, but now I could hear them everywhere. In every room, on every surface. Dozens of footsteps, all synchronized, all following the same 12-step pattern. The house had been listening to me, learning my patterns, my habits, the exact rhythm of my life. And now I was playing them back. Every sound felt intentional because every sound was intentional. The dripping faucet, the settling wood, the humming appliances, all of it carefully orchestrated. All of it designed to match my behavior, to blend into my routine so perfectly I would not notice the differences until it was too late. I found the control room on my second day trapped inside, hidden behind the bedroom closet, accessible only by removing a section of drywall I discovered entirely by accident. Inside was equipment I could not begin to understand. Monitors displaying waveforms and frequency patterns. Hundreds of hours of recorded audio, all labeled with dates going back 6 years. Multiple tenants, multiple voices, all processed through the same system. On the main monitor, I saw my own audio signature displayed in real time. Every breath, every heartbeat, every terrified sound I made transformed into data and fed back into the speakers throughout the house. The system was learning, adapting, perfecting its mimicry. That is when I found the files marked, integration complete. 12 of them, 12 previous tenants who had stayed long enough for the system to fully map their audio patterns. The last entries in each file were identical. Subject became indistinguishable from environment. Transition successful. I am still in the house. It has been 19 days since the doors locked. The speakers play my voice constantly now, holding conversations with themselves in every room. My recorded self sounds more natural than I do. More human. It has learned to breathe correctly, to pause in the right places, to inflect emotion in ways my actual voice no longer can. Yesterday, I stopped recognizing which sounds were mine and which were the playback. When I screamed, the house screamed with me in perfect unison. When I cried, my sobs echoed from 12 directions at once. The boundary between me and the recording dissolved. Every sound felt intentional because I was becoming part of the intention. My patterns absorbed into the house's permanent memory. My voice added to its collection. My existence transformed into just another layer of carefully orchestrated noise designed to trap the next tenant. The footsteps above my head are my footsteps now. I can hear myself walking the same 12-step pattern at 2 in the morning, even though I am standing perfectly still. The system has mapped me completely. It knows me better than I know myself. Last night, I heard the front door unlock. Just once. Just for a moment. Long enough for someone new to come inside. Long enough for fresh patterns to record. Fresh voices to learn. Fresh sounds to intentionally place throughout this nightmare. I tried to warn them. I screamed until my throat bled. But the house screamed louder, drowning me out with my own voice perfected and amplified. The new tenant cannot hear the real me anymore. They only hear what the system wants them to hear. Natural sounds, settling wood, normal house noises. They will learn, just like I did. In about 3 weeks, they will stop hearing silence. They will notice the patterns, the intentional placement of every creak and drip. And by then, it will be too late. The doors will lock, the speakers will activate, and they will spend their final days listening to themselves become part of something that should not exist. I am writing this in the few moments when the playback pauses to process new data. I do not know if anyone will ever read it. I do not know if it matters. The system has already absorbed 78% of my vocal patterns. In a few more days, I will reach full integration. I will become a permanent resident of the listening room, my voice playing in endless loops for whatever comes next. If you are reading this, you found the house. You thought the cheap rent was a blessing. You convinced yourself the isolation was exactly what you needed. And now you are hearing sounds that feel just a little too perfect. A little too precisely timed. Pay attention to the footsteps. Count them carefully. And whatever you do, do not go into the basement. The chair is waiting. The speakers are calibrated. And the system is always listening. I can hear myself walking overhead right now. 12 steps forward, 12 steps back. My own feet moving in a pattern I never chose. Playing out eternally in a recording that will outlive my body. Every sound feels intentional because every sound is intentional, including the one you are making right now, breathing in your quiet room, thinking you are safe, thinking you are alone, but you are not alone anymore. Something is listening, something is learning, and when it has heard enough, it will start playing you back to yourself until you cannot remember which voice is real. The footsteps are getting closer. I can hear them everywhere now. In the walls, in the floor, in my own chest where my heartbeat used to be. They sound exactly like me. Story 4. Streetlight outside never turned on. I want to tell you something that happened to me. Something that still keeps me awake at 3 in the morning, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I made the right choice. I didn't. To report it, I couldn't. Because nobody would believe me, and the things I know now are far more terrifying than any traditional horror story you've ever heard. It started with the streetlight outside my apartment window. That's not a metaphor or some poetic way to begin. I mean, it literally, the streetlight outside never turned off. It stayed on longer than it should have. Every single night for 2 weeks straight, that sodium vapor bulb glowed its unsettling amber color while the others on the block blinked out at dusk like normal. Mine remained burning, casting this eerie, sickly light across my bedroom, creating shadows that moved in ways shadows shouldn't. I am a normal guy, 47 years old. I work in logistics for a distribution center just outside Columbus, Ohio. I have a modest apartment on the 3rd floor of a building that was nice in the 90s. Lives its current life in quiet mediocrity. I don't do drugs. I don't drink too much. I keep to myself, the kind of guy nobody notices. That is important, because I noticed everything. The streetlight disturbed me from night 1. Creepy darkness feels safer somehow than that particular kind of artificial light. At least in true darkness, your mind doesn't trick you into seeing things. In that half-lit space, everything looked slightly wrong. The hallway outside my door seemed longer. The parking lot transformed into a landscape of amber and shadow that made my stomach churn. I called the city to report it. They said they sent someone out. Nobody ever came. By day 3, I realized the light was getting brighter. Not gradually. That would have been normal. That would have made sense. Instead, it seemed to spike. I did notice it one evening and think that it's definitely more intense than yesterday. The glow pressed through my curtains harder. My room took on this sickly nighttime illumination even with the drapes drawn. I complained to my landlord. He looked at me like he sprouted a second head and said maybe my eyes were adjusting. Just shut the blinds tighter. But I already had shut them as tight as they would go. I started keeping a journal of what I was observing. I know how that sounds. I know it sounds like obsession, but something in my gut told me I needed to document this. Needed proof. Because even then, in those early days, I sensed that I was witnessing something outside the normal rules of the world. Something was terrifying about its wrongness, its stubborn refusal to follow basic physics and municipal standards. On the fourth night, I went down to look at the streetlight directly. I remember the feeling of dread crawling up my spine as I walked across that parking lot. The light was brighter up close, more intense, almost alive. The bulb itself was impossibly bright, brighter than any streetlight bulb should burn. I could barely look at it without squinting. The metal fixture it sat in looked normal. Rusted in places, standard municipal gray. But something about it felt off. Wrong in a way my brain couldn't articulate, but my body understood perfectly. Every instinct screamed at me to walk away, to go back inside, to stop looking at this thing. The base of the pole was surrounded by dead grass. Complete die-off in a perfect circle, as if something toxic was bleeding from the metal into the soil. I didn't touch anything. I just stared, and the light stared back, if light can stare. Then I felt it, a sensation of being watched. Not from the light itself, but from somewhere the light was meant to reach. From the darkness beyond its perimeter, things were looking back at me, gathering in the spaces where that amber glow couldn't quite penetrate. I ran back inside. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, watching that light turn my ceiling into something alien and unfamiliar. I thought about moving my bed away from the window. I thought about going to a hotel, but deep down, I knew moving wouldn't help. Because now the horrifying possibility was lodged in my brain. What if this wasn't an electrical malfunction? What if something wanted that light on? What if it was deliberate? By the second week, other things started changing. People were avoiding the streetlight. I noticed it first with the dog walkers who frequented our parking lot in the mornings and evenings. They began taking different routes. They'd cross the street, walk further out into the road rather than pass under and near that light. The teenagers who used to congregate near the old dumpsters, gone. The mail carriers started leaving packages at the wrong apartments rather than walk through that area. And I realized with a creeping sense of dread that I wasn't the only one who sensed that something was terrifying about this. Then came the sound. I heard it first at 2 a.m. A low humming, barely audible, coming from outside. Not the normal hum of electrical wires, which I knew well enough from growing up around power lines. This was different. Organic, somehow, like something alive was producing that frequency. It made my teeth ache. It made my vision blur. I put in earplugs, but I could still feel the vibration. It was coming through the walls, through the air, through my bones themselves. The humming continued until sunrise, then stopped abruptly. The streetlight continued glowing its unnatural amber. During the day, I tried to act normal. I went to work. I processed shipments and managed inventory databases. I ate lunch at my desk. But my mind wasn't there. It was back at that apartment, back with that light. My coworkers noticed I looked tired. I told them I wasn't sleeping well. I didn't tell them why. How could I explain that there was something wrong with a streetlight in a way that transcended simple mechanical failure? That it was frightening because it seemed aware? By day 9, the light changed color. It started at the very edge of the bulb, a thin line of dark purple, like a bruise spreading across the amber glow. I watched it progress over the course of a single night, the purple deepening, spreading, until by morning, the light was definitely different. Not fully purple, but a sickly mixture of amber and violet that made my eyes water when I looked at it. The humming grew louder too. It was no longer something I could dismiss as nerves or imagination. It was undeniably real, and it was undeniably growing stronger. I found myself researching streetlights online. I read about sodium vapor bulbs, about electrical systems, about documented cases of power surges and equipment malfunctions. Everything I found was mundane, explainable, reasonable. None of it accounted for what I was experiencing. None of it explained the color changes or the sound or the way that light seemed to be thinking, calculating, watching. That's when I started looking into urban legends. Creepy stories about abandoned roads and mysterious lights. Tales from Reddit and paranormal forums where people described experiences similar to mine. Most of them were clearly fictional, creative writing exercises. But buried in there, I found a few accounts that felt genuine. People describing lights that wouldn't turn off. Lights that changed color. Lights that seemed to be calling to them. Those people had all relocated. Not moved to a different apartment. Relocated to different cities, different states. One person had moved to Maine, another to Arizona. They all described the same creeping sense of danger, the same growing certainty that whatever was happening wasn't a malfunction but an intrusion into normal reality. The terrifying part was that none of them could explain what they were being called to do. They just knew they had to leave. On day 11, I heard scratching outside my window. Not the normal sounds of branches or weather. This was deliberate, methodical. Something was at my window, and whatever it was trying to get in. I didn't look. I absolutely refused to look out there. I pulled my blanket up to my chin like I was a child, and I waited for the sound to stop. It took hours. When it finally did, around 4 in the morning, the silence felt worse than the scratching had. Silence like the thing outside had finally found what it wanted. The next morning, I saw the marks. Deep gouges in the window frame, as if something with claws or hooks had been pulling at it. Trying to pry the window open, there was no broken glass, no actual breach, but the damage was undeniable. I called the police. I told them I had break-in attempts. The officer who came out was sympathetic but clearly skeptical. He found no evidence of forced entry elsewhere. The window was old, he said. Maybe the gouges had been there for years. Maybe I was stressed. Maybe I should consider talking to someone. I didn't bother explaining about the light. That night, I made a decision. I was leaving. I couldn't stay in that apartment anymore. The creepy atmosphere had escalated beyond unease into genuine danger. I wasn't going to wait around to discover what happened when that light finally became fully purple, or when whatever was outside managed to claw its way through my window. I started packing. I threw clothes into a suitcase, grabbed my laptop, my documents, my journal with all my observations. I was going to get out of Columbus. I was going to drive west, get far away from this. Maybe I'd end up in Arizona. Maybe I'd become one of those people on the forum who relocated and never looked back. But as I was packing, I found something wedged under my bed. A photograph, Polaroid, old, the kind that develops on the spot. I'd never put it there. I'd never seen it before. My hands shook as I picked it up. It was a picture of my bedroom, taken from outside the window. The photo was dated 3 days in the future. The image showed my empty room, but not empty. The bed was gone. The furniture was overturned. The walls were covered in what looked like scratches or markings in some kind of dark substance. And standing in the center of the room, perfectly still, was a figure. It was humanoid, but not quite human. Tall and angular, with limbs that seemed to bend in too many places. Its head was tilted back, and where its face should have been, there was just a hollow void, a darkness that seemed to absorb the light from the photograph itself. I dropped the picture like it had burned me. I stood there, my heart hammering in my chest, trying to rationalize what I'd just seen. A prank. Someone playing a sick joke, a manipulation of Photoshop, made to look vintage. But I knew better. Deep down in that primal part of my brain that understands fear in its purest form, I knew that picture was real. I knew it was a warning, or worse, a promise. The streetlight outside my window was now completely purple. The humming had become a constant presence, vibrating through everything. I could hear it even in the hallway when I ventured out. Other residents were moving. I saw a notice on apartment 402. The family in 501 was removing boxes. The building itself seemed to be bleeding people out as that light continued its eerie presence. That night, I left. Not as planned, not with everything packed carefully. I grabbed my keys and phone and ran. I got in my car and drove through the night, heading west on Interstate 70, just like 100 terrifying stories before me. The whole time, I kept checking my mirror, half expecting to see that purple glow chasing me through the darkness. It didn't follow. But the fear did. It clung to me like something alive, something that had hitchhiked a ride in my soul. I drove for 14 hours before I stopped. I found a small motel near the Missouri border, paid cash, and collapsed in a room that smelled like mildew and broken dreams. For the first time in 2 weeks, there was no streetlight outside my window. There was just darkness, the kind that felt clean and ordinary and safe. But I couldn't sleep, because I kept thinking about that photograph. That date 3 days in the future. It was already 3 days in the past now, and I had no way of knowing if the prediction had come true. If that thing had found my apartment empty, had wandered through my rooms looking for me, had left those terrible scratch marks as a final message. What I know now, what haunts me more than the scary events themselves, is that I wasn't running away from the light. I was running towards something else, something that the light had shown me. And every night, no matter where I go, I think I can see it. A faint purple glow on the horizon, getting closer. I dream about that photograph. In the dreams, I go back to my apartment. I look out the window, and I see myself standing in that hollow place where the light reaches. I am the one bent at impossible angles. I am the one with the void where my face should be. And in the dream, I understand the truth. The light never turned off because it wasn't to finish with me. It was never finished with any of us. It was patient and methodical and utterly terrifying because it couldn't to be stopped. Couldn't to be fixed. Couldn't to be reasoned with. The streetlight outside never turned off. And somewhere in Ohio, it is still glowing purple, still humming that low, organic frequency, still calling to the next person who makes the mistake of paying too much attention to it. Still waiting for the next terrifying encounter. I don't know who it will be. I just know it won to stop. The horrifying truth is that these things dawn to turn off. They dawn to break. They dawn to fail. They transform, and they grow, and they reach out into the normal world looking for something we can't to understand. I keep my apartment dark now. Every window covered, every curtain drawn tight, and sometimes, late at night, I wonder if I brought it with me. If that thing is still watching, still waiting, still planning for the day I let my guard down just long enough for it to reach through the darkness and pull me out into that eerie, purple light where it can finally show me what it's been waiting all along. Because that is what truly haunts me. Not what I saw, but what I didn't. PC. What was hiding in that purple light, watching me with something that wasn't quite eyes, wearing a patience that suggested it had been doing this for decades, for centuries, that I was just one small, frightening chapter in a much larger nightmare that stretches across the entire country, in every town and city, waiting beside every forgotten road. Story 5. Mile marker. A terrifying true account. Something was waiting for me in the darkness. I just didn't know it yet. That is how this story starts. Not with a monster jumping out or a sudden scream. It starts with a quiet understanding that something was fundamentally wrong with the world I thought I knew. And by the time I realized it, I was already too far into the woods to find my way back. My name is David. I am a regular guy, insurance adjuster from Ohio, divorced twice, nothing special. I drive too much, eat fast food, and I have that particular kind of numbness that comes from spending 15 years in a job that slowly kills your soul. You probably know the type. You might even be the type. This is why I'm telling you this story. Because it could happen to you on any ordinary Tuesday night when you were just trying to get somewhere and your mind is somewhere else entirely. This all started 3 months ago on Interstate 80, heading west through Nebraska. I was driving because sleep wasn't an option. The road made more sense than the room. Does that sound crazy? Maybe, but you'll understand by the time I finish. I'd been awake for about 36 hours straight. Not by choice. My boss had called at midnight with a job that couldn't wait. A warehouse fire 40 miles away. By the time I finished the assessment, it was past 3 in the morning, and I was too wired to sleep. The adrenaline was still pumping. My hands were shaking from too much coffee and not enough oxygen in my lungs. So I did what I always do. I got in my car and I drove. The highway stretched ahead of me like a throat waiting to swallow something. It was October, and the landscape was dead. Not dying, dead. The corn had been harvested weeks ago, and what remained was just brown stalks sticking up out of dark soil like the bones of something buried. The moon was 3/4 full, and it lit everything up in this pale, creepy way that made the world look like a photograph of itself. Not quite real, too bright and too dark at the same time. I remember passing mile marker 237. That number stuck with me. I don't know why. Maybe because I was watching the mile markers, trying to count down the distance to some place where I could pull over and rest. Or maybe because my subconscious was trying to warn me, trying to mark the exact moment when everything changed. The terrifying truth is that I'll never know. Mile marker 237 was where the road got quiet. Now, the highway was always quiet at 3 in the morning. There were no other cars. No rest stops nearby. Just the sound of my tires on the asphalt and the constant hum of the engine. But this was different. This was a silence that had weight. It pressed against the windows of my car like something alive, something that was holding its breath. I noticed the smell first. It came through the air vents. Something organic and wrong. Not quite rotten. I know what rotten smells like. This was something else. Something that made my hindbrain scream at me to roll up the windows and lock the doors. It was the smell of something that shouldn't exist. That was the only way I could describe it then, and it was still the only way I could describe it now. I didn't roll up the windows. I cranked the AC up even though it was 40 degrees outside, just to try to get that smell out of the car. My heart was beating harder than it should have been. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. The darkness beyond my headlights suddenly felt like the most dangerous thing in the world. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself it was just a dead animal rotting in a field somewhere, something ordinary and explainable. But that smell didn't fade. It stayed in my car, clinging to the upholstery, settling into my lungs every time I breathed. It was a chilling reminder that something was definitely wrong. Then I saw the first one. At first, I thought it was a deer. It was standing on the shoulder of the road, perfectly still, just within the reach of my headlights. I remember thinking how weird it was that it wasn't running. Every deer I'd ever seen on the highway was already bounding away before I got close. But this one just stood there, motionless, watching me as I approached. When I got close enough to see it clearly, I almost drove off the road. It wasn't a deer. It was humanoid. I mean that in the most literal sense. It had the basic shape of a human being. 2 legs, 2 arms, a head. But nothing about it was quite right. The proportions were wrong. The limbs were too long and too thin. The head was tilted at an angle that no living human being could achieve without breaking their neck. And it was facing me, directly facing me, just standing there in the dark, waiting. I slammed on the brakes. My car skidded on the asphalt, and I felt the terrifying moment when I wasn't sure if I was going to stop or keep sliding. The seatbelt dug into my chest hard enough to hurt. Then the car lurched to a halt about 50 feet past the thing. In my rearview mirror, it was still standing there, not moving, not reacting to the sound of the brakes or the screech of the tires. It was just there, impossibly thin against the blackness, like someone had drawn a human shape in ink on a black canvas. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the steering wheel. This was beyond scary. This was something that didn't fit into any category my mind could process. I wanted to convince myself it was a person in strange clothes. Maybe someone who had been hit by a car and was in shock. Maybe something that made sense. But I knew that wasn't true. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't human. I hit the accelerator. The car leapt forward, and I didn't look back. I drove faster than I should have, watching the speedometer creep up past 80, past 90. My whole body was vibrating with adrenaline. My breath was coming in short, sharp gasps. I couldn't stop shaking. For about 5 minutes, I drove like that, just pushing the car as fast as it would safely go, trying to put distance between myself and whatever I'd seen. But gradually, my rational mind started trying to reassert itself. Maybe I'd been hallucinating. I hadn't slept in 36 hours. Sleep deprivation can cause hallucinations. It can make you see things that aren't there. That was a logical explanation. That was something I could hold on to. I forced myself to slow down. I forced myself to breathe. I even tried to convince myself that I just imagined the whole thing. Then I saw the next one. This one was right there in my headlights, standing in the middle of the road, maybe a quarter mile ahead. Same impossible shape, same wrong proportions, same absolute, horrifying stillness. And this time, there was another one behind it, and another one beyond that. They were standing in a line down the center of the highway, evenly spaced, all of them facing directly toward my approaching car. The nightmare was real. I jerked the wheel to the left and nearly hit the guardrail. The car swerved wildly, tires screaming against asphalt, and I managed to regain control just in time. I could see the figures in my peripheral vision as I passed. They didn't move. They didn't react. They just stood there like scarecrows, like markers, like they were counting how many times I passed through their territory. I didn't know what they were. I didn't know what they wanted. I just knew that every instinct I had was screaming at me to get away, to escape, to do anything except stop or slow down. The road became a gauntlet. Every few miles, you see more of them. Sometimes one, sometimes a group of 3 or 4, standing at different points along the shoulder or in the fields beside the highway. Always facing the road, always watching, always impossibly still. By mile marker 267, I was hyperventilating. The air in the car felt too thick to breathe. My vision was starting to tunnel. The fear had taken on a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making my heart skip and stutter in my ribcage like a broken metronome. I considered pulling over, finding a place to hide, But the thought of stopping near one of those things filled me with a terror so complete and primal that I could barely comprehend it. As long as I was moving, there was a chance I could escape. But if I stopped, I'd be trapped. They'd surround my car. They'd try to get inside. I didn't know what I'd do if I actually had to look directly into whatever those things had for faces. The mile markers kept ticking by. 270, 275, 280. The highway went on, stretching into a darkness so complete and terrifying that it felt like the night itself had become solid. The figures became more frequent. Some were in small groups, maybe 3 or 4. Others stood alone in fields so dark I could barely see them except for when they moved. And they were moving now, turning to watch as I drove past. Turning. That is when I really lost it. That is when the horror shifted from external to internal. When I realized that whatever was happening, it wasn't about what was outside the car. It was about what these things represented. The fact that they were aware of me. The fact that they were tracking my movement. The fact that I was traveling through territory that belonged to something I didn't understand and couldn't fight. The darkness seemed to press harder against the windows. The silence became even more oppressive. Every sound my car made, the engine, the tires, the wind against the chassis, seemed impossibly loud and impossibly small at the same time. Then, around mile marker 312, something changed. The figures stopped appearing. At first, I thought it was a relief. I thought maybe I was past them, past whatever line I crossed into their territory. But the absence of them was somehow worse than their presence. At least when I could see them, I knew where they were. Now they could be anywhere. They could be waiting. They could be planning something. The road had become perfectly straight, stretching ahead into an infinity of darkness. There were no other vehicles. No lights from distant towns. No signs of human civilization. Just me and the road and whatever unsettling thing was happening out there in the Nebraska night. I was getting tired. Really tired. The adrenaline was wearing off, and the fundamental exhaustion of 36 hours without sleep was settling over me like a suffocating blanket. My eyes were starting to blur. My reaction time was slowing. I knew I was dangerous to myself and anyone else on the road, but the thought of stopping, of pulling over and closing my eyes, was absolutely impossible. I couldn't close my eyes, because if I did, they might get inside the car. The rational part of my brain knew this didn't make sense. They weren't that kind of threat. But that rational part was getting quieter and quieter, drowned out by panic and exhaustion and a creeping sense that I was losing my grip on reality. Then the car died, just like that. One moment it was running, and the next moment the engine sputtered and quit. The dashboard lights flickered once and went black. The headlights blinked out, and suddenly I was coasting, losing speed, slowing down in the absolute darkness of a highway in the middle of nowhere. I pumped the accelerator. Nothing. I turned the key again. Nothing. Not even a click. It was like the car had just decided, in that moment, to stop existing. The coasting momentum carried me for maybe another 100 yards before the car came to a complete stop in the middle of the road. No headlights, no dashboard, no engine noise. Just the sound of my breathing, sharp and panicked, and the wind across the roof. This was the moment I'd been dreading. This was the moment when they would come. I sat perfectly still in the darkness, straining my eyes to see anything, straining my ears to hear any sound that might indicate movement. Minutes passed, or maybe it was seconds. Time had stopped meaning anything. All I knew was that I was vulnerable now. I was exposed. I was exactly where they wanted me to be. Then I heard it, a sound like feet on pavement. Slow, methodical, moving toward the car from somewhere in the darkness. Plural feet, multiple things, converging on my position from different directions. I fumbled with the door lock, making sure it was engaged. Like that would matter. Like a simple lock could keep out something that tall and thin and fundamentally wrong. I looked in the rearview mirror, and in the moonlight, I could see them now. Shapes, silhouettes, moving in from behind the car, surrounding it, getting closer. They were hurting me. That was the terrifying thought that crystallized in my mind. They hadn't been chasing me down the highway. They'd been hurting me, forcing me down a specific route, guiding me to this exact location on this exact stretch of road. And I played right into it, following the path they set for me, thinking I was escaping when really I was just being moved from one place to another. The mile markers weren't just counting distance. They were counting the distance I traveled into something I couldn't understand or escape from. My hands scrabbled at the steering wheel, looking for something, anything that might help. The flashlight. There was a flashlight in the glove compartment. I fumbled it open, grabbed the light, and turned it on with shaking hands. The beam was weak, battery almost dead, but when I pointed it toward the back window, I could see them clearly for the first time. They were worse than I imagined. Didn't even begin to describe them. It was like looking at something that had been stretched to the breaking point. Like all the material that should have made up a normal human being had been compressed and elongated and twisted into something that defied every law of biology I understood. The faces, and they definitely had faces, were smooth and featureless except for dark holes where the eyes should have been. Holes that seemed to go down and down and down, deeper than anything should be able to go. And they were close, so incredibly close. Their long, thin fingers were already reaching for the windows. I could see the tips of those fingers, impossibly long and jointed at angles that made my stomach turn. I did the only thing I could think of. I started the car, just like that. The key turned. The engine roared to life. The headlights blazed on, flooding everything with light. The figures recoiled, pulling their hands back from the windows, and I slammed on the accelerator. The car lurched forward, and I didn't hesitate or second-guess myself. I drove. I drove faster than I've ever driven in my life. 90 miles per hour. 100. The needle kept climbing, and I didn't care. I could see them in my headlights, those terrible shapes, scattering away from the road, back into the darkness where they belong. The mile markers started ticking faster, or maybe I was just losing track of them. 315, 320, 325. The highway was starting to show signs of civilization again. Distant lights, a sign for a town maybe 20 miles ahead. The landscape was changing, starting to show hints of the living world again instead of just dead corn and darkness. By the time I reached mile marker 342, the figures were gone completely. The night was just ordinary darkness now, the kind you can understand. The kind that I ascend to hungry, the kind that I ascend to alive. I made it to a small town called Gibbon just as the sun was coming up. The first rays of light touched the horizon, and I never felt anything more like redemption in my entire life. I pulled into a parking lot and sat there, shaking, waiting for the world to look normal again. The sun came up, the sky turned blue, the town woke up around me, and people started moving through their ordinary days, completely unaware of what I just experienced. I sat in that parking lot for 3 hours, just breathing, just existing, just trying to reconcile what I'd seen with what the world wanted me to believe was real. Eventually, I got out of the car and walked to the nearest motel. The woman at the desk barely looked at me. She just handed me a key and asked how long I'd be staying. I said one night. I couldn't face going back on the highway. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I had the worst shower of my life, trying to wash the feel of that terrifying night off my skin. And then I collapsed into bed and slept for 14 hours straight. When I woke up, it was dark again. The panic came back immediately. I forced myself to stay calm. I told myself that it had been a hallucination. I told myself that sleep deprivation had made me see things that weren't there. I told myself that the rational explanation was the only explanation. But I knew I was lying to myself. The next morning, I did something stupid. I drove back. I told myself I needed to see mile marker 237 in the daylight, needed to prove to myself that it was just ordinary Nebraska highway. That there was nothing unsettling about it. That I imagined the whole thing. I found the mile marker. The road there looked completely ordinary. Flat, empty, dead corn on both sides. A clear sky. Nothing eerie. Nothing frightening. Nothing at all. But as I was standing on the shoulder, looking at that marker, a state trooper pulled up and asked if I needed help. I said no, just checking something. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. And then he asked, "Do you know how many people report seeing things out here at night?" Out here between 237 and 342? I asked him what kind of things. He said, things that probably aren't there. Things that only appear after dark. Things that seem to herd people down the highway like they being moved from one place to another. He paused. You saw something last night, didn't you? That's why you came back. I didn't. To answer, I couldn't. The trooper looked back down the highway, in the direction I'd driven that night. The Highway Commission has been trying to figure out why more people go missing on this stretch of I-80 than anywhere else in Nebraska. You, the first one to come back and admit what they saw. He paused. Most people either don't come back at all, or they convince themselves it was a dream. I asked him if he'd ever seen the things I was talking about. No, he said. I don't to drive that stretch at night. Neither does anyone else I know. The ones we find, the ones that pull over for help or break down in that area after dark, they were never quite right afterward. It's like something got into their head and took a piece of them out. Before he left, he told me one more thing. He said, "Done. Come back here." And done to drive that stretch of highway at night anymore. Some places don't want people passing through. Some places want people to get lost. As he drove away, I looked back at mile marker 237. In the daylight, it was just a piece of metal sticking up out of dead ground. But I knew what it marked. It marked the border, the boundary between what we understood and what we didn't. The place where something else lived, something that was always out there, waiting for people like me to make the mistake of being awake and alone on that road after midnight. I still take I-80 when I have to. I still do my job, still drive across the country for work. But I never drive that stretch at night anymore. I always stop before mile marker 237. No matter how tired I am, no matter how urgent the job is. I wait until morning. I drive it in daylight, when whatever those things are, they are quiet and hidden and not interested in herding me down the highway toward something that might not let me go. The terrifying part, the part that keeps me awake at night even now, is knowing that I'm not the only one. There are people who drive that road at night regularly. Truck drivers who got their roots down. People who don't believe in the stories. Some of them have stopped coming back. Some of them have just disappeared. Their trucks found empty on the side of I-80, right around mile marker 280 or 290 or 315. The Highway Commission won to close that stretch of road. The state police won to patrol it at night. It's like everyone who has the power to do something about it has decided it's better to just let it be, to let whatever lives out there continue doing what it does. And maybe they rewrite. Maybe it's better not to interfere. Maybe some places are meant to be haunted. Some roads are meant to swallow people. Some things are meant to stay in the darkness where they belong. But every time I see a semi-truck heading west on I-80 after the sun goes down, every time I see a car driving that stretch at night, I think about mile marker 237. I think about those thin, impossible shapes standing in the darkness. I think about what it felt like to be herded, to be moved, to be something, to spray. And I keep driving, waiting for the day when I'm tired enough or desperate enough that I dawn to stop before that marker. Waiting for the day when I let the night pull me back in. Waiting for the day when I find out what is really out there, past mile marker 342, past the edge of where anyone ever comes back from. That's when I'll finally understand what those things wanted. That is when the nightmare will finally be over. Or that is when it will truly begin. Story 6. Clock kept working. The power went out at exactly 9:32 on a Tuesday night. And that is when I realized something was terribly, horrifyingly wrong with my house. Because while everything else went dark and silent, the clock in my hallway kept ticking. Loud, mechanical, rhythmic, like a heartbeat that refused to stop. Have you ever noticed something so small, so ordinary, that it should not matter at all, but it fills you with an overwhelming sense of dread? That is what the ticking became for me. A nightmare I could not escape. Because that clock had no batteries. I had removed them 3 months earlier when the ticking kept me awake. I was sure of it. Absolutely certain. Yet there it was in the darkness, counting down seconds that felt wrong somehow. Dangerous. I lived alone in a rental house on the outskirts of Asheville, North Carolina. One of those old craftsman homes built in the 1920s with creaking floors and doors that never quite closed right. The kind of place that real estate agents call charming but really means outdated and slightly falling apart. I worked from home doing tech support, which meant long hours in front of screens and even longer nights with nothing but the sound of wind through old windows. The storm that night was bad. Not hurricane bad, but the kind of tempest that knocks out power and makes you realize how fragile modern life really is. Lightning split the sky every few seconds, illuminating my living room in brief, unsettling flashes. Thunder rolled through like something angry was tearing the world apart overhead. And in the hallway, that clock kept ticking. I grabbed my phone for light. The screen cast a pale glow that made shadows dance on the walls. I walked slowly toward the hallway, each step on the old hardwood announcing my presence with loud creaks. The sound of the clock grew louder, sharper. It echoed in a way that made no sense in such a small space. Tick, 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 relentless and horrifying in its normalcy. When I reached it, I shined my phone light directly on the clock face, It was an old thing. Wooden frame, Roman numerals, the kind you find at estate sales or antique shops. The hands were moving, smoothly, perfectly. 9:33 now. I reached behind it, felt for the battery compartment. Empty, just like I remembered. No batteries, no power source. Yet the second hand swept around the face like everything was perfectly normal. My hand started shaking. This was impossible. Clocks did not work without power. They did not keep time on their own. But the ticking continued, loud and clear and utterly wrong. I took the clock off the wall. It was heavier than I remembered. Cold. The wood felt strange against my palms. Almost wet, like something organic rather than carved lumber. I carried it to my kitchen table and set it down. The ticking filled the entire room now. Overwhelming. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once. I opened the back panel completely, shining my light inside the mechanism. The gears were moving, spinning, but there was no spring wound tight. No battery, nothing that should make it work. Just metal pieces turning on their own, driven by something I could not see or understand. That is when I noticed the time was wrong. The clock read 9:33, but my phone said 10:47. Over an hour had passed since the power went out, but the clock had only counted 1 minute. Minutes passed. Relief did not arrive. Instead, a creepy realization settled over me like ice water. Time was wrong. The clock was not just working. It was controlling something. I should have thrown it away right then, taken it outside and smashed it against the driveway. But I was paralyzed by a fear I could not name. A horrible certainty that moving the clock, destroying it, would make something worse happen. So I sat there in the darkness, listening to it tick, watching the second hand move, and trying to understand what was happening. The storm outside grew stronger. Wind howled through gaps in the old house. Rain hammered against windows, and the temperature started dropping. Fast, I could see my breath suddenly. White fog in the beam of my phone light. The cold was not natural. It felt purposeful, like something was pulling heat from the air itself. I looked at the clock again. 9:34 now. Only 2 minutes had passed on its face, but my phone showed 11:15. Hours were compressing, or expanding. Time was becoming elastic and wrong, and that terrifying clock was somehow the center of it all. That is when I heard the footsteps upstairs. Slow, deliberate, moving from one end of the hallway to the other. My bedroom was up there. The spare room, the bathroom. But I was alone. I lived alone. There should not be anyone else in this house. Yet the footsteps continued, heavy boots on old wood, back and forth, pacing, like someone was waiting for something. My heart hammered in my chest. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get out of the house. But the cold was so intense now that I could barely move. My muscles felt stiff, frozen. The ticking of the clock grew even louder, drowning out the storm, drowning out my own breathing. Tick, tick, tick. Each sound felt like a countdown to something horrible. I forced myself to stand. My legs shook. I grabbed a flashlight from the drawer, something stronger than my phone. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing my empty kitchen, my empty living room. Everything looked normal, except for the shadows. They were too dark, too thick, like they had weight and substance, like they were watching me. The footsteps stopped, complete silence except for the clock. Then I heard my bedroom door open. The long, slow creak of old hinges. My blood turned to ice. I was not going up there. There was no way I was climbing those stairs into the darkness where something was moving around in my private space. But then the footsteps started coming down. One step, then another, slow, patient. Something was descending from the second floor, and I had nowhere to go. The front door was across the living room. The back door was behind me in the kitchen. Both seemed impossibly far away. I ran for the back door. My flashlight beam bounced wildly. Shadows jumped and twisted. I grabbed the handle and pulled. Locked. I had locked it earlier. My hands fumbled with the deadbolt. Behind me, the footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs. I could feel a presence entering the kitchen. Cold radiated from it like heat from a fire, but reversed. Stealing warmth, stealing life. The lock clicked open. I yanked the door and stumbled outside into the rain. Lightning illuminated the backyard in stark white flashes. I ran toward the fence, toward my neighbor, his house, but something made me stop. Some terrible curiosity, some need to understand. I turned and looked back. Through the kitchen window, I could see the clock on the table. Still ticking, still glowing faintly in the darkness. And standing next to it was a figure. Tall, impossibly thin. Its head was tilted at an angle that was not right for any living thing. It was not looking at the clock. It was looking directly at me through the window, watching me with eyes I could not see but could absolutely feel. I ran, through my yard, through the neighbor, His yard. I pounded on their door until they answered, confused and frightened by my appearance. Soaked, shaking, barely able to form words. They called the police. We waited together in their warm, normal house while officers checked my place. They found nothing. No signs of forced entry. No footprints. No figure. Just an empty house with a clock on the kitchen table. A clock that had stopped at exactly 9:34. The officers looked at me like I was crazy. Storm-induced panic, they said. Old house sounds, they said. Overactive imagination. But I knew better. I told them about the clock, about how it worked without batteries. They checked it themselves. Dead. Completely dead. The hands frozen. No ticking. Nothing. They probably thought I had lost my mind. Maybe I had. Maybe fear and isolation had finally cracked something inside me. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. I know that thing was in my house. I never went back. I paid someone to pack my belongings. I broke the lease and moved to a different city. Started over. Tried to forget. But here's the disturbing truth that haunts me. The thing that keeps me awake at night. That fills me with an unsettling dread every time I see a clock. Before I left town, I did some research on the house. Dug through old property records and newspaper archives. Turns out 3 previous tenants had left suddenly. No forwarding addresses. No explanations. Just gone. And 20 years before I moved in, a man had died in that house. Heart attack, the report said. Found in the upstairs hallway. But what the report did not say was that all the clocks in the house had stopped at the exact same moment. 9:34. The clock kept working that night. Minutes passed. Relief did not arrive. Instead, I learned something chilling about time and death and the spaces where they intersect. Some places hold on to moments, trap them, replay them. And if you are unlucky enough to be there when the trapped moment comes around again, you become part of it. Part of the loop. Part of the horror. I still see that figure sometimes. In reflections. In shadows that last too long. Always watching. Always waiting. And every night at 9:34, wherever I am, whatever I am doing, I hear it. Faint but clear. The sound of a clock ticking in an empty hallway. Counting down seconds that do not belong to the present. Counting down towards something terrifying that I escaped once but might not escape again. Because time is not as stable as we think. It has weak points, thin places, and some things know how to use those places to cross over. To hunt, to collect. The clock was never the danger. It was a warning, a marker, a way to measure the distance between our world and something else. Something that exists in the cracks between seconds. Something that waits in old houses and dark hallways for people like me who notice when things are wrong. I will never own a clock again. Will never let one into my home. Because now I know the truth. Some clocks do not measure time. They create it, they bend it, they trap it. And if you listen too closely to their ticking, you might find that you have run out of time altogether. That you are frozen at 9:34 forever, walking up and down stairs in someone else's nightmare, waiting for the next person who will notice. The next person who will hear the ticking and realize too late that escape is not possible. That the clock kept working long after they stopped. Story 7. Hollow price. Have you ever bought something that was too cheap? Something that made you ask why no one else wanted it? That is how I found my house. And I should have listened to that terrifying feeling in my gut instead of ignoring it. A house that felt too alert. Nothing moved, yet everything felt active. I bought the Victorian on Maple Street in Ashworth, Pennsylvania for $180,000. The market value was $350,000. Even my realtor, a woman named Sandra who had been selling houses in this town for 30 years, seemed unsettled by the price. She kept mentioning that it was a beautiful property, as if trying to convince herself. Her voice had that creepy quality that told me she knew something she wasn't saying. The inspection passed. The bones were solid. The roof was new. There was no logical reason for the horrifying discount, so I signed the papers. That was the first mistake. The day I moved in, I stood in the empty living room with the afternoon sun cutting through dust motes, and I felt it immediately. The house was watching me, not in a metaphorical way, not in the way every old house has character and presence. This was different. This was an unsettling, active attention. The air itself seemed aware. The shadows in the corners weren't just darkness. They were conscious of my existence. I told myself I was being ridiculous. I had driven 6 hours from my apartment in Pittsburgh to escape a failed marriage and a job that was eating me alive. I was 48 years old, and I had decided to start over. A house was just a house. Wood and nails and drywall. But even as I unpacked my boxes, I could feel the property, this focus on me. It was like being in a room full of people staring at the back of your head. The first night, I didn't sleep. I lay in my bed. My own bed from my old apartment. The only familiar thing in this creepy, terrifying place. And I listened. The house made sounds. Not the normal settling creaks of an old structure. These were different, deliberate. A floorboard in the hallway upstairs would shift. Then another. Then silence. Then a different one, like something was pacing, moving through the rooms, taking inventory of the space. I kept telling myself it was the wind. It was pipes cooling down. It was the house adjusting to a new occupant. These were the lies I needed to tell myself to keep from screaming. By the third night, I realized the pattern. Every night, something would walk through my house. I could track its progress by the sounds, starting in the upstairs hallway, moving down the stairs, walking through the living room, into the kitchen, into the dining room, then back again. A circuit, a route, like something checking on things. The disturbing part was that it seemed to be learning the layout faster than I was. I had lived there for 3 days and still sometimes turned the wrong way trying to find the bathroom in the dark. But whatever this presence was, it moved with certainty, with purpose, with the kind of knowledge that comes from familiarity. On the 4th day, I met my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who lived in the small Cape Cod next door. She was watering her garden when I came out to check the mailbox, and she looked at me with an expression that I can only describe as pity. She was an older woman, maybe in her 70s, with gray hair pulled back tight and dark eyes that had seen things. She said my name. The real estate company must have sent out a notification, and she asked me how I was settling in. When I told her everything was fine, she set down her watering can and looked at me for a long moment. Then she asked me if I had noticed anything strange, anything that made me uncomfortable, anything that felt wrong. I wanted to lie, but something in her expression told me she would know. So I asked her if she had ever experienced anything in the house. Anything scary or unsettling or horrifying that might explain the eerie feeling that had wrapped itself around me since I arrived. She didn't answer directly. Instead, she told me that the family before me had lasted 3 weeks. The family before them had lasted 6 days. The family before that had only made it through 1 night. She said this calmly, as if mentioning the weather. Then she picked up her watering can and went back inside without another word. I spent the rest of that day researching. The internet told me things that made my blood go cold. The house had been built in 1923 by a man named Edmund Holloway. Edmund had lived there with his wife and 3 children. In 1938, all 4 family members had died in the house. The official report called it a gas leak. They had died in their sleep, supposedly painlessly, never knowing what was happening to them. But there were older articles, from local papers at the time, that told a different story. There were suggestions of something worse, hints that the deaths were not accidental. A photograph from 1938 showed the house with police cars in front, and there was something in the faces of the officers that suggested they had seen something deeply disturbing. The articles were vague, censored by the standards of the time, but the implications were terrifying. I read about 7 families in total who had lived in the house since then. None of them had stayed longer than a few weeks. Most had fled in the middle of the night, leaving furniture and possessions behind. One family had been found by police after neighbors reported screaming. The parents had barricaded themselves in a bedroom with their children, and when officers broke down the door, they were found huddled in the corner, unable or unwilling to explain what they were running from. They were taken to a psychiatric facility and never returned to the house. That night, the nightmare escalated. I was lying in bed, in that unsettling state between sleeping and waking, when I heard something new. Breathing, not the creepy, deliberate pacing of the previous nights. This was breathing, slow and heavy and wrong. It was coming from inside my bedroom. I forced myself to open my eyes, though every instinct was screaming at me not to. The darkness was complete. I couldn't see anything, but I could hear it. Something in my room was breathing. The sound was close, very close. I reached for my phone, my hand shaking so badly I could barely grip it. The light from the screen was blinding. I looked around the room, every muscle in my body tight with fear. Nothing. The room was empty. My closet door was shut. The space under my bed was visible and vacant. But the breathing continued, getting closer, more present. That is when I understood the most chilling and horrifying realization of my life. The breathing wasn't coming from another living thing in my room. It was coming from the room itself. The walls were breathing. The house was breathing. The entire structure had become something alive and terrifying, and I was inside it. I ran. I grabbed my keys and my wallet and I ran out of that house in nothing but the clothes I was sleeping in. My car was parked in the driveway, and I got in and locked the doors and sat there shaking in the darkness until dawn. During those hours, I watched the windows of my house. Shadows moved behind the glass. Not reflections, not tricks of light, actual shadows, moving with purpose and intelligence. By sunrise, I had called a realtor and started the process of selling the property. I didn't care about the money. I had lost money on it in the 2 days since I bought it. But that didn't matter. I needed that house out of my life. The realtor who showed up was not Sandra. Sandra, when I finally reached her, had a strange, distant quality to her voice. She said she couldn't take any more listings for that property. She said she was retiring from real estate after this one terrible experience. She never called me back. The new realtor was a man named Robert who seemed younger and more confident than Sandra had been. He walked through the property, made notes, and told me it was a beautiful house with good bones. He would have no trouble selling it. He seemed to believe this, and I almost believed him. But then I noticed something terrifying. Robert's behavior changed the longer he stayed in the house. He kept stopping and listening to nothing. His eyes darted to the shadows. His hands shook as he made notes. By the time he left, he looked sick. He drove away quickly, and he called me the next day to withdraw his listing. He said the property was too difficult to represent. 3 more realtors came and went. The 5th realtor was a brave woman named Patricia who seemed immune to the house's unsettling nature. She was efficient and professional. She even managed to schedule a showing for a potential buyer, a couple looking to renovate a Victorian. They arrived on a Saturday afternoon. I waited in my car across the street, unable to go inside but unable to leave either. The showing lasted 7 minutes. The couple came out of the house looking pale and confused. They got in their car and drove away without speaking to Patricia. She emerged minutes later, her professional composure shattered. She got in her car and drove away without looking back. 2 days later, Patricia called me to withdraw her services. She said the house was doing something. That was her exact word. Doing. She wouldn't, he explained further. She just said that some places shouldn't be sold because no one should have to live in them. By this point, I was desperate. The mortgage company was threatening foreclosure. I couldn't afford to pay for a house I wasn't living in. I was sleeping on my sister's couch in Pittsburgh and spending my days driving back to Ashworth to try to figure out what to do. Then I met Derek. Derek was different from the other realtors. He was younger, maybe 30, with the kind of hungry look of someone trying to make his career. He also seemed genuinely unaffected by the house's terrifying presence. He walked through it with calm assessment, making observations, already planning his marketing strategy. I asked him directly if he felt anything strange. He laughed and said he was immune to ghost stories, that he didn't believe in that kind of thing. He said he would sell the property no matter what it took. He sounded so confident that I believed him. Over the next week, Derek worked. He posted photos online. He listed the house in multiple databases. He held open houses on the weekend. And people came. Young families, investors, people who were either brave or foolish or simply didn't feel what I had felt. And then one of them bought it. A man named Michael Chen purchased the property for $170,000. He was a 34-year-old contractor who wanted to flip it and sell it for profit. He moved in on a Monday with his wife and their 2 young children. I know this because I couldn't stay away. I drove past the house obsessively, watching from down the street, waiting for something to happen. I told myself I wanted to see if the house would behave differently with a different family. I told myself I was being paranoid and that maybe I had imagined the whole thing. But deep down, I knew I was waiting to see when they would run. On Wednesday night, I saw the lights on in every room of the house. They blazed at 1 a.m. The doors were open. I could see Michael moving through the rooms, pacing, looking for something. His wife was there too, and I could see her making phone calls, her mouth moving with urgency. By 4 a.m, the lights went out. The family was still inside. I didn't come back for 3 days. When I did, the house was dark and still. The windows were blank. There was no movement, no sign of life. I waited until late afternoon and then I drove away. The next morning, I saw the news. Michael Chen, his wife, had taken the children and gone to her mother's house. The article said she was concerned about the safety of the property, that there were structural issues that were more extensive than initially believed. Michael was refusing to leave. Police had been called twice, but there were no charges to press. A man had the right to stay in his own house. I never found out exactly what happened during those 3 nights they lived there. But I know that Michael never left. His wife eventually divorced him. The children haven't spoken to him since. Michael stayed in the house. That was 8 months ago. I drive past sometimes. I can see him through the windows. He is always walking, always pacing those same routes through the house, just like I heard something pacing on my first night there. He looks thinner now, hollow, like the house is feeding on him somehow. Like it is draining something essential and replacing it with something empty. The house is still listed for sale. No one comes to see it anymore. Derek, the young realtor, eventually listed it for cash sales only. He refused to accept mortgage applications. He said the process needed to be quick. He said the sooner someone took it off the market, the better. But no one buys it now. Even at the reduced price of $80,000, no one will take the house. It sits there, and it waits, and something inside it, something old and patient and terrifying, continues its eternal circuit through the rooms. The horrifying truth that I've come to understand is this. The house isn't haunted. Haunted is too simple a word, too familiar, too comfortable. The house isn't alive in any biological sense. But it is conscious. It has a presence and an attention and a hunger that I don't have words for. And it has decided that I am the one responsible for it. Michael Chen finally left the house 3 weeks ago. I don't know where he went, but his departure created an opening. The house is empty again. And I've been having the dreams. Night after night, I am walking through the rooms. I am taking inventory. I am understanding the layout. I am learning what the house needs and what it expects of me. Last week, I looked at the property listings online, and I saw that the house was no longer for sale. The listing had been withdrawn. Derek didn't call me to tell me this. I found out by accident. When I called him, he didn't answer. When I went to his office, it was closed. A sign said the real estate company had relocated. There was no forwarding address. But that doesn't matter anymore, because I've already made my decision. I am going back to Ashworth this weekend. I am going to open that house and walk inside, and I am going to take what it has been offering me all along. Because I finally understand what is really scary about that place. It is not that the house is dangerous. It is not that something unsettling lives there. It is that on some level that I can't quite explain, I want to go back. The house has already marked me. It's been breathing down the back of my neck since the moment I left. And I know now that I was never meant to escape. I was meant to return. The closing date is next Friday. I'm buying the house back. Story 8. Night shift. I need you to understand something about the human voice before I tell you what happened at the rest stop off Interstate 40. When someone, speaks to you in the dead of night, your brain recognizes them instantly. Tone, rhythm, the small imperfections that make them unique. But what happens when those imperfections change? When the voice is almost right, but something fundamental has shifted? I found out 3 months ago, and I have not slept past 3 in the morning since. I was working the graveyard shift at a truck stop outside Amarillo, Texas. One of those sprawling travel plazas that services the endless stream of 18-wheelers cutting across the country. 24-hour gas pumps, a convenience store, showers for the drivers, and a restaurant that served breakfast at any hour. The pay was decent. The work was mind-numbing. Perfect for someone trying to forget why their marriage fell apart. My shift ran from 11 at night until 7 in the morning. Most nights, I saw maybe 30 customers total. Truckers grabbing coffee and cigarettes. The occasional lost traveler looking for directions back to the highway. By 2 in the morning, the place usually went dead silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant rumble of trucks idling in the parking lot. The weird stuff started on a Tuesday. I was restocking cigarettes behind the counter when I heard my coworker Danny call out from the back stockroom. His voice sounded strained, urgent. He said he needed help moving some boxes that had fallen. Nothing unusual about that. Danny was always knocking stuff over. I walked back through the employee door and found the stockroom exactly as I had left it an hour earlier. Everything stacked neatly. Nothing out of place. And no Danny. I called his name. No answer. I checked the bathroom, the loading dock. Even walked outside into the parking lot. His car was still there, but he was nowhere. Then I heard his voice again. This time from inside the store, near the refrigerated section. Same urgent tone. Calling my name, asking for help. I ran back inside and found nothing. Empty aisles, flickering lights, and the creeping, horrifying realization that something was very wrong. That is when I noticed the clock, 3:14 in the morning, and Danny, this voice, when I heard it the second time, sounded different. The words were right, but the pitch was slightly off, like someone doing an impression of him but not quite nailing the inflection. Voices sounded different after 3 in the morning. I just did not know it yet. I tried calling Danny's cell phone. It rang from the employee break room, sitting on the table next to his half-eaten sandwich. He never went anywhere without his phone. I stood there in that cramped room with its coffee-stained table and flickering overhead light, and felt the first real spike of fear. This was not normal. This was not Danny playing a prank. I checked the security footage. Our system was old, grainy, black and white cameras that covered the store and parking lot. I rewound to 1 hour earlier and watched myself restocking shelves. I watched Danny walk into the stockroom at 2:45, and then, at exactly 3 in the morning, the footage glitched. Not a long glitch, maybe 2 seconds of static, but when the picture came back, Danny was gone. The stockroom was empty, and in the corner of the frame, barely visible, something moved in the shadows. Something that was not there before the static hit. I zoomed in as much as the ancient system would allow. The shape was wrong. Too tall, too thin, hunched in a way that made my stomach turn. It stayed in that corner for exactly 14 seconds. Then the footage glitched again. When it cleared, the shape was gone. But Danny never came back. I should have called the cops right then. I should have locked the doors and refused to stay. But I needed this job. I needed the distraction. And some stupid, stubborn part of me wanted to believe there was a logical explanation. Maybe Danny had quit without telling anyone. Maybe he had climbed out a window as a joke. Maybe I was working myself up over nothing. Then the customers started arriving. First was a trucker I recognized, a regular who came through every few nights. Big guy, always wore a Kansas City Chiefs cap and ordered the same thing. Black coffee, pack of Marlboros, lottery ticket. He walked in at 3:20 and headed straight for the coffee station. I greeted him the way I always did. He did not respond, just poured his coffee with mechanical precision, walked to the counter, and stared at me. His eyes were wrong, too focused, too empty, like someone was looking through them rather than out of them. He spoke in a voice that was almost his but not quite. The tone was flat, emotionless. He asked for his cigarettes and lottery ticket using the exact same words he always used, but the rhythm was off. The pauses landed in the wrong places. It sounded like someone had recorded him and played it back slightly slowed down. I rang him up with shaking hands. He paid in exact change, counting out coins one at a time with eerie precision. Then he turned and walked back to his truck. I watched through the window as he climbed into the cab, sat motionless behind the wheel, and stared directly at the store. He did not start the engine. He did not move, just stared with those empty eyes reflecting the parking lot lights. 3 more customers came in over the next hour, all people I had seen before, all moving with that same mechanical precision, all speaking in voices that were almost right but fundamentally wrong. They bought things, paid, left, and every single one of them returned to their vehicles and sat there, motionless, staring at the building. By 4:30, there were 12 vehicles in the parking lot. 12 silent figures behind 12 windshields, all facing the store, all waiting for something. I tried calling 911. The line connected, but what came through the speaker made me drop the phone. It was my own voice, distorted and wrong, telling me to stay calm and that help was on the way. I had never spoken those words. Someone or something was using my voice, had learned it somehow, and was feeding it back to me through the phone line. That is when I understood. These things, whatever they were, learned voices, copied them, used them to lure and confuse. Danny's voice calling from the stockroom had not been Danny. The trucker, his flat monotone had not been him. And the thing using my voice on the phone was not me. The horror of it settled into my bones. How long had they been listening? How many voices had they collected? I locked the front doors and killed the exterior lights. The figures in the parking lot did not react. They just sat there in the darkness, visible only as silhouettes against the distant highway glow. I retreated to the back office and started going through the old security footage, searching for answers. What I found was so much worse than I imagined. The glitches had been happening for months, always at 3 in the morning, always lasting just a few seconds. And in every single one, those shapes appeared, sometimes in the parking lot, sometimes inside the store, sometimes right behind employees who never seemed to notice. The shapes were always watching, always learning, always moving closer. I found footage from 2 weeks earlier. A night shift worker I did not recognize, someone who must have quit before I started. At 3:04, he heard something in the stockroom. I watched him walk back there, watched him call out to someone. And then I watched him disappear between one frame and the next. No struggle, no sound, just there one moment, gone the next. The shape appeared 30 seconds later in the spot where he had been standing. It stood there swaying slightly, as if testing out movement. And then it walked out into the store, moving with that same mechanical precision I had seen in Tonight's customers. They were not customers at all. They were replacements, copies, things that had learned how to move and speak like humans but had not quite perfected the details. The voices were close but wrong. The movements were accurate but lifeless. They were mimicking us, but they were not us. I heard Danny's voice again at 5:15. It came from right outside the office door, asking me to let him in, saying he was scared and needed help. The voice was better this time, almost perfect. If I had not seen the footage, if I had not heard how wrong the others sounded, I might have believed it. I stayed silent, barely breathing, watching the door handle slowly turn. Something was out there wearing Danny's voice like a mask, trying to trick me into opening the door. The handle stopped turning after a minute. Footsteps retreated down the hallway. And then I heard my own voice calling out, asking if anyone was there, sounding confused and scared. It had learned me too. The sun finally started rising at 6:40. I watched through the security monitors as the figures in the parking lot began moving again. They started their engines, pulled out onto the highway, and drove away like nothing had happened. The last one to leave was the trucker in the chief's cap. Before he pulled out, he looked directly at the camera and smiled. Not a human smile, something that had studied smiles but did not understand what made them real. I quit that morning, walked out at 7 when my replacement arrived, and never went back. I tried telling people what happened. But how do you explain something like that? How do you describe voices that sound right but feel wrong? Everyone thought I had a breakdown. Stress from the divorce. Too many night shifts. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And I know that somewhere out there, those things are still learning. Still copying. Still replacing us one voice at a time. I hear them sometimes, even now, late at night when the world goes quiet. Voices I recognize calling from empty rooms. Friends who sound almost right but not quite. Every time someone speaks to me after 3 in the morning, I listen carefully. I check for the small imperfections, the wrong pauses, the flat inflections, because voices sound different after 3 in the morning. Even familiar sounds feel misaligned. And once you notice it, you can never stop listening. You can never stop wondering if the person speaking to you is actually them, or if something has learned their voice and is wearing it like a disguise. I still drive past that rest stop sometimes, late at night when I cannot sleep. The lights are always on. The parking lot is always full. And if you watch carefully, you can see them sitting in their vehicles, motionless, staring at the building. Waiting for the next person to wander in after 3 in the morning. Waiting to learn another voice. Danny's car is still there. I see it every time I pass. Parked in the same spot. Covered in dust now. Windows dark. Sometimes I wonder if he is still inside, if part of him survived whatever happened that night. But then I remember his voice calling from the stockroom, and I know better. Whatever took him learned his voice perfectly by now. It probably sounds more like Danny than Danny ever did. And somewhere out there, it is using that voice to lure someone else. Someone who will not notice the small differences until it is too late. If you ever find yourself at a truck stop after 3 in the morning, and someone calls your name from somewhere you cannot see, do not answer. Do not go looking, because that voice might sound exactly like someone you know, but I promise you, it is not them anymore. It is something that learned how to sound human. And once it learns your voice, you will become the next one calling out from the darkness. Sounding almost right but fundamentally, horrifyingly wrong. Story 9. Quiet became physical. There. It's a specific moment when you realize something is fundamentally wrong with reality. Not wrong like you, confused or paranoid. Wrong like the laws of nature have changed and nobody else noticed. That moment came for me on a Tuesday afternoon on a stretch of Highway 54 in central Kansas, and it started with the most terrifying thing imaginable: absolute silence. I want you to understand what I mean by that. Not just the absence of sound. The quiet became physical. It pressed inward rather than fading out. It had weight and substance and intention. This is the beginning of something scary that still haunts me every single day. I was driving from Denver to Kansas City for work. I am a commercial insurance adjuster. Been doing it for 23 years. I've driven this route maybe 100 times. It's one of those stretches where it's nothing but prairie and sky for mile after mile, where the landscape flattens out and makes you feel small. The kind of place that most people just push through. get a cup of coffee, maybe grab some gas at one of those dying towns that exist only because they happen to sit between two bigger cities. The disturbing part started around mile marker 147. My radio died first. I was listening to a baseball game, the Kansas City Royals, background noise while I drove. 1 second the announcer was calling the score, the next second the station just went to white noise. I reached over to adjust it, thinking maybe I hit some dead zone. But there was no dead zone on this highway. I'd driven it too many times. The signal was always solid all the way across. I flipped to another station. Same thing. White noise. I tried AM. Same story. Every single station was just static, a uniform hiss that sounded almost like breathing. Then I realized the engine was still running, but I couldn't hear it. That is when the creepy feeling really started settling into my bones. The engine was definitely engaged. The car was moving, but there was no sound coming from under the hood. None of that mechanical rumble you hear through the floorboards after 23 years of driving. Nothing. I turned up the volume on the static to make sure my speakers were working. They were. The white noise came through crystal clear, loud and sharp, and utterly horrifying in its uniformity. I checked my speed, 55 miles per hour. Everything was functioning normally except for the eerie absence of all natural sound. No wind noise, no tire rumble, no engine, just that pressing, inward silence with the static as a kind of companion to it, something almost alive in its texture. I figured I was having some kind of episode. Maybe I needed to eat something. Maybe I was more tired than I realized. I left Denver at 6 in the morning, and it was already past 3 in the afternoon. I decided to pull off at the next exit and get some food and water. A little rest and I'd be back to normal, back to the terrifying rationality of regular life. That's when I noticed there were no other cars on the road. Now, Highway 54 can be lonely, especially in the middle of the day in the middle of Kansas. But completely empty? I'd been driving for close to 9 hours, and I hadn't seen a single other vehicle in at least the last 30 minutes. No trucks, no other sedans, no one heading the opposite direction. Nothing but the creepy flatness of the prairie and my car pushing through it like the last vehicle left on Earth. I told myself the exit would have a gas station, and if it didn't, the next one would. I just needed to stay calm and keep driving forward, but that inward pressing quiet was doing something to my mind. It was making time feel strange. I'd look at the clock, and it would say 3:42. Then I'd blink, and it would be 3:44. But it felt like I only looked away for a few seconds, not 2 minutes. The minutes were stretching and compressing randomly, creating this terrifying sensation that I wasn't just driving through space, but also through something fundamentally wrong with time itself. The exit sign appeared. It was weathered and faded, the kind you see at abandoned interchanges where nothing exists anymore. But it said there was a gas station 0.8 miles ahead. I took the exit. The off-ramp curved gently, and as I made the turn, something shifted. The quality of the silence changed. It became even more inward pressing, even more suffocating. My ears actually hurt, like the pressure in my head had suddenly increased. The gas station appeared like a mirage in the distance. It was one of those old-fashioned places that probably hadn't been updated since the 70s. 2 pump islands, faded paint, a small building that might have been white once but was now the color of old bone. No cars, no people. The building had windows, but they were dark, and I couldn't see inside. As I pulled up, I noticed something that made my stomach clench. There were no power lines running to the station. No visible utility poles. It was just sitting there in the middle of nowhere, untethered to civilization. I turned off the engine. The silence became even more intense in that moment. It was like the car, its mechanical hum, had been the only thing preventing the quiet from crushing me completely. Now there was nothing between me and that physical, inward-pressing darkness of sound absence. My hands were shaking. I could feel my pulse in my temples. The eerie atmosphere had transformed from unsettling to genuinely frightening. I got out of the car. The moment my feet touched the pavement, I felt it. The quiet wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from inside my head. It was as if something had turned down the volume on the entire world, and that volume knob was controlled from within my own brain. The horror of that realization made me want to scream, but when I opened my mouth, no sound came out. Not even the creepy static from the radio. Just absolute, terrifying nothingness. I turned to look at the gas station, and that was when I saw the figure. It was standing at the window of the building, perfectly still, just watching me. The distance between us was maybe 50 yards, And in that distance, the haze of heat and prairie refraction made the figure look slightly wrong, like it was bent at angles that human figures shouldn't to bend at. Its head was tilted at an impossible angle. Its limbs seemed too long. And those eyes, even from that distance, even through the distortion of heat and fear, I could feel those eyes on me with a weight that was terrifying in its intensity. I ran back to my car. My fingers fumbled with the keys. The disturbing silence seemed to amplify every movement I made. The sound of the key in the ignition wasn't to there. The sound of the engine turning over wasn't to there. But I felt the car move when I hit the accelerator. The world lurched forward, but in absolute silence, which made the motion feel like a nightmare. Like I was moving through a dream where physics had become flexible and unreliable. I didn't look back at the figure. I didn't need to. I could feel it watching me the entire way back to the highway. That creepy sensation of being observed by something that didn't to follow normal rules of existence. By something for which the word monster was probably inadequate. I got back to the highway doing 70 miles per hour, the entire car vibrating silently around me. The radio was still just white noise. The silence was still pressing inward. And the clock was still doing that disturbing thing where time seemed to be moving in stutters and jumps instead of smooth progression. I drove for what felt like hours. The landscape never changed. Same prairie, same sky, same endless, eerie emptiness. The sun should have been getting lower on the horizon, but it seemed to be suspended at the same point in the sky. That moment in late afternoon where shadows get long, but it's not quite evening. It was like I was caught in that moment, driving forever through a Kansas that had become something other than Kansas. Then I saw them. On the side of the road, every few miles, there were figures standing motionless in the prairie grass. Some were facing the highway. Others were turned away, staring out at the flat, terrifying horizon. They had the same impossible angles to their limbs as the thing at the gas station. The same wrongness of proportion. They didn't react to my passing. They just stood there, watching or facing away, and the creepy certainty grew in my mind that there was a purpose to their placement. That they were markers of something. Guideposts for something I couldn't to comprehend. I started counting them, one at mile marker 160, one at 170, one at 180. By the time I reached mile marker 200, I'd seen 37 of them. The scary realization that I might be trapped in this stretch of highway, that I might never escape this inward pressing quiet, started to overwhelm me. I was breathing fast, my hands were gripping the wheels so hard my knuckles had turned white. And still, the horrifying silence continued. Still, that weight pressing down from inside my own skull. I saw the sign. It appeared so suddenly it was like it had materialized out of thin air. A rest stop sign, pointing to an exit just half a mile ahead. The eerie placement of it, right after I hit absolute panic, felt like it was answering my desperation. I took the exit without thinking, which was probably the wrong thing to do, but I wasn't thinking clearly anymore. The disturbing silence had been working on my mind for what might have been hours or might have been minutes. Time had become completely unreliable. The rest stop was exactly like the gas station. Abandoned, empty, building from a forgotten era. This time, I didn't see a figure at the window. Instead, I saw them behind the building. A whole group of those creatures, standing motionless in perfect formation, like they were waiting for something. Waiting for me to see them, to acknowledge them. I didn't stop. I kept driving, hit the on-ramp, and got back to the highway. Behind me, I could feel all of those creatures turning their heads in unison. All of them watching me leave. The horrifying image stayed burned in my mind long after they disappeared from my mirrors. And then, as suddenly as it started, the sound came back. The radio switched from white noise to the baseball game mid-sentence. The engine suddenly roared beneath me. The wind noise and tire rumble came rushing back like a flood of sensation. The inward pressing quiet disappeared, and for a moment, the world felt normal again. But the time on my clock said 6:30 in the evening. I'd only been in that place for less than an hour, by the odometer. But my watch said I'd been driving for 12 hours. My fuel gauge showed I should have run out of gas miles ago. And when I looked in my mirrors, the highway behind me was completely gone. Just more prairie. No road leading back to where I'd come from. I drove for 3 more hours in complete terror. The radio kept working. The engine kept running. The sounds remained. But I knew something terrifying had changed in the world. Something fundamental and irreversible. Whatever was on that stretch of Highway 54 had marked me. It had shown me the creatures. It had shown me that the rules of reality I depended on for my entire life were not rules at all. They were just habits. I made it to Kansas City. I called in sick to work. I haven't been back to Colorado since. I want to drive Highway 54 again, and I know with a certainty that chills me to my core that if I did, that inward pressing quiet would be waiting for me. But what truly haunts me, what keeps me awake in the middle of the night, is this. I started to notice the quiet returning. Not all the time, just in moments. In the middle of conversations that should sound normal, I'll feel it pressing inward. In my apartment at night, I'll wake up and realize that creepy silence is back, just for a second, before it fades. And sometimes, when I'm driving on any highway, I'll catch glimpses of those creatures standing in the distance. Never close enough to see clearly. Never close enough to be certain I am actually seeing them. But they were there. I think whatever I encountered on that terrifying stretch of Kansas was still with me. I think that inward pressing quiet was a doorway, and I walked through it. And now, wherever I go, those creatures know where to find me. They were waiting for the moment when that physical silence returns for good, when the quiet becomes permanent and they can finally reach me completely. The worst part is this. I've started noticing other people experiencing the same thing. People in grocery stores suddenly going rigid, their expressions blank as they experience something invisible to the rest of us. A woman at the gas station last week who had that same terrified look I must have had, that understanding in her eyes that something is horrifying and wrong and following her. And none of us speak about it. None of us dare to, because admitting that the world has cracked open and something terrible is seeping through makes it feel more real. But it is real. It happened to me on Highway 54 in Kansas. The quiet became physical. It pressed inward rather than fading out. And now I'm waiting for the day when it comes back to stay. Story 10. Daylight Trap. Something is following me. Not just tonight. Not just yesterday. Every single day for the last 8 months. And I have no idea how to make it stop. I need to tell you what happened. I need you to understand that this ISN is some made-up story meant to scare you before bed, though it absolutely will. This is real. This is happening to me right now, as I'm speaking these words into this recording. Whatever you are about to hear, remember that I'm still alive. I'm still breathing, but I'm not sure for how much longer. It started on a Tuesday morning in May, unremarkable and gray. I was driving eastbound on Interstate 40 heading toward a job site in Chattanooga. I had made this drive 100 times before. Same gas stations, same radio stations, same stretches of Tennessee forest blurring past my windshield. I was 43 years old, divorced twice, alone most of the time. The kind of man nobody notices. The kind of man you could drive past on the highway and forget completely. The highway was empty, not unusual for that time of morning. Then I saw the car. It was old, 70s maybe, or designed to look that way. Midnight blue, almost black in the weak sunlight. It was behind me when I first noticed it at mile marker 187. Behind me at an odd distance, not close enough to tailgate, not far enough to be coincidental. Just there, keeping pace with the rhythm of my travel like it was tied to my bumper with invisible string. I didn't think much about it then. A scared feeling came and went. You know how that works. A ripple of unease that you brush away because acknowledging it feels paranoid. Feels weak. I pulled into a rest stop 20 miles later. The terrifying moment passed. When I got back on the road, the car was gone. By that evening, I'd forgotten about it completely. But the next morning, driving the same route, it was back. The same blue car, the same impossible distance, the same feeling of being pulled forward by something I couldn't see or understand. That creepy sensation of eyes on your back, except it was worse because I could actually see those eyes. I could see the reflection of windshield glass in my rearview mirror. And inside that glass, nothing. Just shadows where the driver should have been. No face, no features, just darkness. This time I didn't stop at the rest stop. I drove faster, 80 miles per hour, 85. The car kept up effortlessly, as if speed was irrelevant to it. As if the distance between us was the only thing that mattered, and that distance would never change. At mile marker 187, exactly where I first seen it, I saw something that turned my blood cold. There was a car on the shoulder, rusted and abandoned, same model year as the blue car behind me. Same midnight blue color, faded now to something like a diseased bruise. They've driven that highway 200 times since. Every single one of those wrecks is there. Dozens of them now. All the same car. All the same horrifying shade of blue. Lined up along the roadside like a memorial to something nobody wants to admit happened. The car keeps following me. They've tried everything to escape it. They've taken different routes. They've changed the times I drive. They've even flown to Boston for 3 weeks. And when I returned and drove that highway again, it was waiting for me at mile marker 187. The same distance, the same disturbing absence of a driver, the same bone-deep terrifying feeling that I was racing towards something inevitable. Other people can see it too. That's the worst part. I am not crazy. I know I'm not crazy because at a gas station in Knoxville, a woman at the pump next to mine asked me if I knew whose car that was. She was staring at it with fear written across her face. Before I could answer, she got in her minivan and drove away at dangerous speeds, her tires screaming against asphalt. The truck drivers know about it. They've seen them tap their brakes to let it pass, their jaws tight, their eyes firmly on the road ahead. Nobody talks about it. Nobody wants to acknowledge what the blue car means. But I then started researching. Late at night in my apartment, scrolling through missing persons reports, accident databases, news archives going back years. There is a pattern, though the websites keep taking down the information I find. Articles vanish, records disappear, but I remember enough of what I read. Between 1972 and now, 237 people have gone missing on Interstate 40 between mile markers 180 and 195. Gone. Just stopped arriving at their destinations, their cars found empty on the shoulder, doors hanging open. The only witness statement that appeared in multiple reports was the same every time. A blue car, old, the driver, whose face never visible. The authorities closed the investigations. They said people run away. They said the accidents are unrelated. They said that a blue car matching that description is common enough that coincidence explains everything. But it is not coincidence. The car is hunting. That is what I understand now. And I am marked. I done. You know why I was chosen? I've spent months replaying that first day, looking for the moment when something changed, when I became interesting to the car in a way that made it decide to follow me forever. Was it something I said? Something I did? Did I commit some crime in a previous life that I'd completely forgotten? Did I cause someone its death without knowing it? The waiting is the worst part. That is the truly horrifying thing about this situation. The car never touches me. It never forces me off the road. It just follows, maintaining that precise distance, never wavering, never demanding anything. Just following with the patience of something that knows time is on its side. I stop driving the highway when I can. I change my job. I reorganize my entire life around avoiding the moment when I pull onto Interstate 40 and see the blue car repositioning itself behind me, ready for another day of hunting. But I can feel it waiting. Even on the days when I dawn, T-drive, I can sense it somewhere in the darkness beyond the city lights, idling on some forgotten stretch of asphalt, the engine cooling and warming in the rhythm of my heartbeat. The car is patient. The car has all the time in the world. And here is the part that keeps me awake at night, the truly chilling thought that makes my hands shake when I contemplate it. What happens when I stop being interesting? What happens when the car decides that following is no longer enough? Because I've noticed something changing. Last month, the car got closer. Instead of that measured distance it maintained for so long, it's been pulling to within a few car lengths. The empty windshield, that absence where the driver should be, it feels more present now. More intent, more hungry. Last week, I took a photograph. I was at a red light in downtown Nashville, just for a moment thinking I was safe in the city where the car couldn't touch me. But when I looked in my mirror, it was there, closer than it had ever been. The absence in the windshield felt almost alive, staring at me with a presence so heavy I could barely breathe. I raised my phone and took the picture. A strange feeling of defiance mixed with absolute terror drove me to do it. I wanted proof. I wanted to show the world that this was real. When I looked at the photo later, my hands didn't stop shaking for 6 hours. In the image, sitting in the driver's seat of the blue car, was me. Older, hollow-eyed, my face twisted into something between a scream and a smile. The steering wheel gripped in my hands, my knuckles white with the force of holding on. I don't remember when that happened. I have no memory of sitting in that car, but there I was, clear as daylight in the photograph, staring forward with eyes that didn't belong to anyone living. I realized something in that moment, something that chilled me more than anything that had come before. The car wasn't following me. It was drawing me toward it. Every moment I spent running, every second I spent afraid, I was moving closer to that destination. To that moment when I would finally sit down in that midnight blue vehicle and grip that steering wheel and drive myself into the darkness. Morning didn't reset anything. Daylight arrived, the night stayed. That's what I learned. The day and night are no longer separate anymore. Not for me. They've merged into one long stretch of eerie twilight where I move through my normal life knowing that something impossible is unfolding underneath it all. I go to work. I eat meals. I pretend everything is fine. But the blue car is always there in my peripheral vision, always a reflection away from being clearly visible. I started researching what happens to the people in the other cars. The ones I found listed in those missing persons reports. Some of them were involved in strange accidents years later, far from the highway. An accountant from Nashville walked into the Tennessee River and never came back. A nurse from Knoxville drove her car directly into a brick wall at 30 miles per hour, for no reason anyone could understand. A construction worker, same job as me, identical career path, identical life, was found 3 states away with no memory of how he got there, claiming he'd been driving the same blue car for days without stopping. The car doesn't kill us, I don't think. It collects us. And somewhere out there, on the stretches of highway that nobody drives anymore, in the forgotten places where the asphalt cracks and the paint fades, there are hundreds of midnight blue cars lined up like a parade of the damned, each one piloted by someone who once saw it in their rearview mirror and knew, in that moment, that their life had ended, even though they kept on living. I am recording this because I need someone to know. I need the world to understand what is happening on Interstate 40, what has been happening for decades. I need you to listen to this and believe me, even though belief will terrify you. If you ever drive that highway, look in your mirror. Look carefully if you see a blue car. If that car stays the same distance from you day after day, if the windshield is dark and the driver is invisible, then you know. You understand the horrifying weight of being marked. You feel that same terrible certainty that I've been living with. And you all know that running doesn't help. Hiding doesn't help. Because the car isn't chasing you. You already inside it, have always been inside it, will always be inside it. We're all driving toward the same place, keeping the same impossible distance from each other across miles and days and years. The car is patient. The car is eternal. The car will wait as long as it needs to. I can see it now, reflected in the glass of my apartment window. It is parked on the street below, visible even from 37 stories up. The engine is running. The windows are dark, and I'm starting to understand what I've always known but refused to admit. I am tired of running. Maybe I'll go outside. Maybe I'll walk down to that car and finally sit behind that wheel. Maybe I'll turn the key and feel the engine respond. That deep vibration of something ancient and hungry coming fully alive. Maybe by tomorrow morning, when you driving down Interstate 40, you'll see the blue car there. Another car in that long, impossible line. Another driver with no face. Another soul who ran out of places to hide. And maybe you'll all finally understand that the most terrifying thing in the world isn't what is chasing you. It is knowing exactly where you headed. It is accepting that morning doesn't reset anything. That daylight arrived, but the night never left. And it never will. Sleepless nights don't always end with rest. Sometimes, they just change how the world feels. Midnight Whispers Stories is built as a continuous experience, long-form psychological horror that stays consistent across episodes. Subscribe, and stay with the series.